researchers studying ancient skeletal remains have confirmed something that genuinely stops you in your tracks when you actually sit with it. The average life expectancy of our ancient ancestors was somewhere between 25 and 35 years, a number that sounds almost incomprehensibly low by modern standards, until you actually understand what that number really means and what was genuinely driving it. Because the full picture is considerably more fascinating, considerably more nuanced, and honestly, considerably more impressive than that single stark statistic initially suggests. Let's start with something genuinely important that needs to be addressed immediately before anything else, because misunderstanding this single point causes people to completely misread the entire topic. That 25 to 35 year average life expectancy figure doesn't mean ancient humans were old, worn out, and dying at 30. It means infant and child mortality was so catastrophically high that it dragged the average down dramatically. If an ancient human successfully survived past childhood, their realistic odds of living into their 40s, 50s, and in certain documented cases, even their 60s and beyond, were considerably better than that single average number suggests at first glance. The number isn't telling you when adults died. It's telling you how brutally dangerous simply being born and surviving early childhood actually was in the ancient world. Now let's bring up what was actually killing ancient infants and children at such staggering rates, because this connects directly to something running throughout this entire topic: infection. Ancient human populations had zero access to antibiotics, zero understanding of germ theory, and zero ability to treat what we would today consider entirely routine bacterial infections. A wound that modern medicine clears up with a basic antibiotic prescription in a week represented a genuine death sentence in the ancient world if that wound became seriously infected. A respiratory illness that keeps a modern child home from school for a few days could, and frequently did, progress into fatal pneumonia in an ancient child with no treatment options whatsoever available. Let's bring up something genuinely fascinating regarding the specific disease burden ancient humans actually faced, because this is considerably more complicated than simply saying they lacked medicine. Hunter-gatherer populations living in small, mobile bands actually had certain genuine disease advantages compared to later settled agricultural populations. Infectious diseases that spread most efficiently through dense, stationary human populations, the kind of epidemic diseases that would eventually devastate ancient civilizations, simply couldn't sustain themselves easily through small, scattered mobile groups. This means certain ancient populations were in some specific documented ways actually less exposed to particular categories of infectious disease than the agricultural populations that came after them. The disease picture genuinely changed, and in certain respects, genuinely worsened when humans settled into permanent, dense communities. A deeply counterintuitive finding that deserves considerably more attention than it typically receives in casual discussions of ancient health. Now let's bring up something genuinely important regarding childbirth specifically, because this represented one of the single most dangerous events in the entire life of an ancient woman. And understanding this matters enormously for understanding ancient mortality patterns overall. Without any of the modern obstetric interventions we now take completely for granted, childbirth carried a genuinely significant risk of fatal complications. Hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labor, complications that modern medicine handles routinely and successfully, killed women regularly throughout ancient history. Archaeological skeletal evidence has confirmed this pattern repeatedly. Female skeletons from ancient populations frequently show evidence of repeated pregnancy and, in many documented cases, death during or shortly following childbirth, at ages that would be considered tragically young by any modern standard. Let's bring up something genuinely interesting regarding diet and nutrition specifically, because this is an area where the picture is considerably more nuanced than popular imagination typically assumes. Early hunter-gatherer populations, when food was actually available and accessible, often had access to a genuinely diverse, nutritionally rich diet compared to what came later. A wide variety of wild game, seasonal fruits, roots, nuts, and other plant foods, providing a broad nutritional profile. The problem wasn't necessarily diet quality during good periods, it was the catastrophic vulnerability to seasonal scarcity, drought, failed hunts, and the simple, brutal reality that food storage technology in early periods was extremely limited. Starvation and severe malnutrition during lean seasons genuinely weakened immune systems, stunted physical development in children, and made populations dramatically more vulnerable to the infectious diseases we've already discussed. The two factors compounded each other in ways that were genuinely deadly. Now let's bring up something that probably deserves considerably more recognition than it typically receives in discussions of ancient mortality: physical injury and trauma. The daily physical reality of ancient life involved a level of genuine bodily risk that modern life in most parts of the world has almost entirely eliminated. Hunting large, dangerous animals without metal weapons or firearms, processing food and materials with sharp stone tools, traveling across difficult terrain without any of the footwear, trail infrastructure, or safety equipment we now consider completely basic. Ancient skeletal remains show healed fractures, traumatic injuries, and evidence of serious physical damage at rates that strongly suggest physical injury was an extremely common feature of daily ancient life rather than an exceptional event. And critically, injuries that a modern person survives routinely, a badly broken leg, a deep puncture wound, a serious head injury, frequently became fatal in ancient contexts simply because the infection risk from any significant wound was so high and the options for managing that infection were essentially non-existent. Let's bring up something genuinely fascinating regarding what ancient skeletal remains can actually tell us about the specific physical experience of aging in the ancient world, because this connects directly to something considerably more interesting than simple mortality statistics. Researchers analyzing ancient skeletons have found considerable evidence of arthritis, joint degeneration, and accumulated physical wear in individuals estimated to have been in their 30s and 40s. Not because ancient humans aged faster in some fundamental biological sense, but because the sheer cumulative physical demands of daily ancient life placed a level of sustained mechanical stress on the human body that modern sedentary lifestyles simply don't replicate. A 35-year-old ancient hunter-gatherer had likely spent literally every single day of their adult life performing the kind of sustained, heavy physical labor that most modern people never approach even occasionally. The body showed it. Now let's bring up something genuinely important regarding the specific role that parasites and chronic disease played in ancient health, because this is a dimension that often gets overlooked in favor of more dramatic causes of death, but was genuinely significant in ways that compounded everything else we've discussed. Ancient humans living in close proximity to animals, water sources, and soil harboring a wide variety of parasitic organisms faced a chronic parasite burden that modern populations in developed regions have largely eliminated through sanitation infrastructure and anti-parasitic medicine. Intestinal parasites chronically sapping nutritional resources from an already nutritionally stressed body. Waterborne pathogens causing chronic digestive illness. Parasitic infections affecting organs and tissues over extended periods. None of these necessarily killed quickly, but all of them chronically weakened bodies, compromised immune function, and made individuals considerably more vulnerable to the infections and injuries that ultimately did kill them. Let's bring up something genuinely interesting connecting this entire topic to the transition from hunting and gathering to settled agriculture specifically, because this represents one of the most genuinely significant and honestly somewhat paradoxical shifts in all of ancient human health history. When humans began transitioning to settled agricultural lifestyles, something genuinely unexpected happened to population health, at least in the short and medium term. It got worse in several measurable, documented ways. Skeletal evidence from early agricultural populations compared to preceding hunter-gatherer populations from the same regions frequently shows increased evidence of nutritional deficiency diseases, increased dental decay from higher carbohydrate grain-based diets, increased evidence of infectious disease, and in many documented cases, actually decreased average adult stature, a reliable physical indicator of overall childhood nutritional status. Humans traded dietary diversity and certain mobility-based health advantages for the food security and population density that agriculture eventually enabled. And the immediate health cost of that trade was real and measurable in the bones of the people who lived through it. Let's also bring up something genuinely worth appreciating regarding what ancient humans actually did manage to develop in response to these health challenges, because it would be genuinely misleading to present this entire topic as simply a story of helpless suffering without any human response. Evidence of ancient medical practice, herbal remedies, wound treatment, bone setting for fractures, and even remarkably early evidence of surgical procedures, including trepanation, the deliberate drilling of holes in the skull, suggests ancient humans were actively attempting to address health problems with the knowledge and materials available to them. These weren't random superstitious rituals. They represented the early accumulated practical medical knowledge of populations who were carefully observing cause and effect relationships between treatments and outcomes and passing that knowledge forward. The same incremental knowledge-building process we've discussed throughout this entire series in other contexts. Now let's bring up something genuinely fascinating regarding the specific ancient individuals who did manage to survive into older age, because these individuals tell us something genuinely important about ancient social structure that deserves real appreciation. Archaeological evidence has found ancient skeletal remains of individuals who clearly survived serious injuries, chronic debilitating conditions, and significant physical disabilities for extended periods in contexts where survival without sustained community support and care would have been essentially impossible. A severely injured individual who couldn't hunt or gather couldn't survive alone. Their survival is direct physical evidence that ancient communities were actively caring for vulnerable members rather than simply abandoning them. Older individuals who survived into their 50s and 60s almost certainly represented genuinely valuable repositories of accumulated knowledge and experience that the community actively invested in preserving. Finally, it's worth touching on something genuinely important regarding what the actual experience of ancient aging and death looked like for the individuals involved, rather than simply viewing this entire topic through a purely statistical modern lens. Ancient humans weren't walking around in constant conscious terror of their short lifespans. They were living fully within a social and environmental context where the realities we've discussed throughout this video were simply the known parameters of existence. They built communities, raised children, accumulated knowledge, developed technologies, created art, and maintained rich social bonds across whatever lifespan they actually had. The brevity wasn't experienced as deprivation in the way a modern person might imagine it. It was simply the world as it actually was. So why did ancient humans die young? Based on everything we've covered throughout this entire video, the honest, complete answer comes down to a genuinely compounding combination of factors working against survival simultaneously. Catastrophically high infant and child mortality from infection dragging down average lifespan statistics dramatically. No antibiotics and no germ theory making even routine wounds and illnesses potentially fatal. The specific and considerable dangers of childbirth without any modern obstetric support. Seasonal nutritional vulnerability and the chronic immune suppression that malnutrition produces. The genuine physical dangers of daily ancient life and the infection risk attached to any serious injury. A chronic parasite burden that modern sanitation has largely eliminated. And the genuinely paradoxical health costs of the agricultural transition that in the short term made certain measurable health outcomes worse rather than better. And honestly, maybe the most genuinely important thing to take away from this entire topic is recognizing that the humans living through all of these realities weren't simply victims of their circumstances. They were actively building the accumulated medical knowledge, community care structures, and practical survival strategies that eventually, across an enormous span of human generations, led to the world where the average human lifespan has more than doubled. We didn't get here through a single brilliant medical discovery. We got here the same way ancient humans accomplished nearly everything else we've covered throughout this entire series, through patient accumulated observation, careful practical knowledge building, and the simple persistent human refusal to stop trying to understand and improve the conditions of our own survival.